Now, Jesus was a Jew. He was not a Christian, incidentally, for those of you who haven't figured that out yet. Jesus was a Jew. He lived as a practicing Jew, and he died as a Jew. He was, and I do believe this, without sin, or as I would like to characterize him, as the embodiment of what Judaism was supposed to be, at any rate, truly meant to be. Anyway, this Jesus, who was all of this, we also know had virtually no sympathy for the politics of holiness. And I've always marveled at that today contemporary preachers ask their people to be holy. You don't hear Jesus say any of that nonsense. He has nothing to do with that. But today's preachers are smarter than Jesus, just like the Jewish leadership was smarter than Jesus when they insisted on holiness. I, for one, follow Jesus, but that's who I happen to have given my life to. Now, this means Jesus was not so much interested in demanding belief or obedience to a set of rules and regulations as the way to God, or as a way to control God so that God, because of your behavior, won't hurt you. Think about that. But instead, he wanted to reorder the hearts of people and of his listeners to experience the compassion of God. So what develops with Jesus is the idea of the compassion of God vis-a-vis the politics of holiness. And this is where we find ourselves with the account of Jesus and the demon-possessed man of Gerasenes. And I do want to say this, and you've heard me frame sermons like this before very briefly. What is the church symbolic of? A what? A boat. And who's on the boat? The disciples, and we are. So if you're on the boat with Jesus, you go where Jesus takes you, right? You don't do the steering, right? And so you go where Jesus takes you because that's where Jesus wants you to be. Does that make sense? Sure. So the boat and the disciples, and we're disciples, the disciples are on the boat with Jesus, and where do they go? They go across the water to Gerasenes and to the area of the Decapolis. The Decapolis was 10 cities, nothing but pagans. In other words, was it a clean place? No, it was a filthy, dirty place. Now, the religious leadership, who were holy people, wouldn't go there. Jesus, who is the Son of God, goes there. Now, of course, the leadership won't go there because they're smarter than Jesus. Jesus, who is just Jesus, he decides, this is where I'm going to go, and who am I going to take? My what?
Disciples.
My disciples. And where are we going to go? To the holy, holy land? No, where are we going to go? To where the monsters are. We're going to go to the impure, unholy, filthy place that any Bible-believing, Bible-abiding lover of God would never go, and that's to Gerasenes, and that's to the area of the Decapolis, because they're pagans. And that means they're unclean, and that means if you go there, Jesus, you'll become unclean. But of course what happens when Jesus goes there with his disciples, he doesn't get unclean, but what does he do? Makes them clean. All right. So the key verse, or one of the key verses, it seems to me, is in verse 19, where Jesus, after the healing the man, the demoniac, tells him that God had mercy on him. Now, mercy is an interesting word. Today, I'm pretty sure that most of us, it means granting pardon to a convicted person after he has done wrong. And so you're to be merciful. So we'll be merciful to Charlie Manson. Okay? We'll grant him pardon. In other words, it's a legalistic term. However, at least in the narrative before us, there's no evidence that the impure and outcast person was responsible for a state of impurity. I don't know if you know this, some people are crazy and they have no control over that. And it's not because they did anything wrong, it just happened to them. Incidentally, sidebar, that's the whole terrifying notion of the Exorcist. I think most of you have seen that movie. The whole idea is here you get this little girl, 12, 13 years old, virginal, a sweetheart, a nice human being, and Satan enters her. And she has nothing to say about it. That's why that's a spooky movie. So here, the demoniac, we don't know whether he's invited evil upon his life. I don't think so. He was just crazy. He was possessed by darkness, and consequently he was impure. Now that meant that Bible-believing people of the Old Testament who were following the politics of holiness could not approach him, because if they approached him, they would become impure, and if they became impure, that would jeopardize the safety and the security of Israel. So they had to stay away from him. And that meant the very people who should have been responsible for healing this person, by the way they read Scripture, were not permitted to touch him. And so this guy's doomed forever. So he lives in a holy land, an unholy land. He's got an unholy mind. He's running around with a bunch of pigs around him. Everything around him is filth. Except Jesus comes in a boat with his disciples, and they land in the land of filth. And Jesus tells him about who God really is. And he says he really is merciful. The meaning of the word mercy, not always, but certainly in this context, and certainly much of the time with Jesus, means compassion. And in the manner of Jesus, so too is Jesus compassionate. Thus, what he does here in this scene is he breaks the rules of the politics of holiness and invites into his life the unclean, the flea-bitten, the stinking ones, the homeless. Of course, those who are filled with fear will have nothing to do with those kinds of people, because they have nothing to do with Jesus Christ. Think about that. I love Jesus, but I don't love demoniacs, and I don't want to be around them. I love Jesus, but I don't want to be around people that don't. This is a nice tie. Wear as expensive a tie that I wear. And so it is, people that are afraid will have nothing to do with Jesus. Jesus is compassion as God is compassion. Jesus practices the gift of compassion instead of the politics of holiness. And this is why those who dare to imitate Jesus are also compassionate. After all, it is in the Sermon on the Mount, not in this pulpit, where, although I would say it, it did not originate in this pulpit, but it's in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus said, "Blessed are those who are compassionate, for they will show compassion." Or if you like it, blessed are those who are merciful, for they will be given mercy.